Howdy, y'all. We've been talking about a series basically about what it means to be Christian. And, life is a funny thing. We oftentimes get into these little ruts and we let it slip past us, and then at the same time, when the time is gone, we want it back. You see this a lot with parenting. People talk about, oh, it was just yesterday that they were this big, and, just kind of letting time slide by, and when we're in that moment, we're like, man, I just wish this day would end, and then when it's over, we're like, man, I wish I could get it back. It's a funny thing. We treat others like garbage a lot, oftentimes, and then we want people to treat us like we're God. Like I can chew out everybody else, and that's okay, but they better not walk on me. And I was listening to this Ravi Zacharias. He was preaching, and one of the things that he talked about was, well, I guess that's a little bit of a rabbit trail. Sometimes you hear something that's really good and you want to share it, but it's just not the place, I guess. In life, we empty ourselves for others, and oftentimes it's sad to say that they throw us away, and it feels like such a waste. But at the same time, if we push people away, we find ourselves alone. So we're in this constant tug of war between, trying to keep ourselves safe and trying to keep ourselves loved. There's always this push in life between what we want to be and what we want to do and what God wants us to be and what God wants us to do. See, it's easier in life to live guarded, to live, where you don't let your guard down. But that's not how God wants us to live, and honestly, that's not really a very good way to live anyways. If you live guarded, yeah, you'll never be hurt, but you'll never really live. And success is really how much we are willing to let God change us versus how much, we live how we want to live instead. Life really isn't fair if you think about it. But what's more important than whether or not it's fair is how we deal with it. Are we dealing with it as Jesus would? And that's really the heart of Christianity. And amidst all this craziness, are we dealing with it like Jesus would? Because, Jesus went through the same things we did. He was hated by religious people. Him and religion didn't really get along that much, which is funny because that's what people say who don't want to know God. They say, oh, religious people, they're all just a bunch of hypocrites. It's like, hey, I get it. Jesus was wronged by religious people too. That doesn't mean that Jesus isn't true. Sometimes we like to pretend like God somehow doesn't know what we're going through, even if he wasn't all-knowing. Jesus did still become fully human, and although he was always fully God, he did become fully human. And as such, he was treated like trash. Though he was God himself, people treated him like trash. So I think that maybe God knows a little bit of what we're going through. He was betrayed by Judas, not obviously not in the sense of betrayal like he didn't know it was coming, but betrayed in the sense of, well, stabbed in the back. So let's look at this. We looked 2 weeks ago about thinking like Jesus. Last week we were looking at talking like Jesus, and tonight we're going to look at acting like Jesus. Now, I think the things that we've talked to so far have been pretty hard, but I think what we're going to talk about tonight is even harder. So thinking like Jesus, we were talking about seeing value and that kind of stuff. We talked about humility too. And then and talking like Jesus, we talked about a lot of that, just talking down to people that we do, just maybe being aggressive or talking unloving because we don't value people like Jesus does. We don't oftentimes talk to them like he would. So, what's inside inevitably bubbles out through what we say, but sometimes we get really good at acting and pretending, but eventually what's inside comes out through our actions too. And let's look at this in Philippians 2:5-8. This is not Jesus talking. This is somebody Jesus called. His name is Paul. He wrote a lot of the New Testament. And this is something that he's saying about Jesus because he's trying to teach them how they should be acting, and so he uses an example of Jesus. He says, in your relationships with one another, have the same mindset as Jesus, who, being in very nature God, he himself was God, did not consider equality with God as something to be used to his own advantage, something to be exploited, something to be held on to. Instead, he it says here, rather he made himself nothing by taking the very nature of a servant, being made in human likeness. Now, a lot of cults have misused that verse to say something along the lines of he wasn't fully God, or when he was on earth, he stopped being God. That's not true. And being found in appearance as a man, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to death, even death on a cross. And we'll stop right there. So, Jesus, being fully God, he always has been fully God, and he always has been. He's always existed, and he's always been God, and he never stopped being God. But here's the kicker, okay? There's two things that Jesus didn't do. The first thing, Jesus wasn't prideful. I'm God, you're not. I shouldn't have to do this for you. He didn't have that prideful attitude. You know what I mean? Even though he was, get this blows my mind, even though he was better than us, he didn't act like he was better than us. Isn't that crazy? Have you ever been around somebody who just kind of looks down their nose at you? I grew up in Southern California. There's not so much here, but there's very much classes of people. So basically, there's like the rich, real snobbish people, and man, oh man, they are a very elite group. Like, it's very uncomfortable being in the same room with them. I mean, you just know that they're, I've oftentimes been in the room with them. I've never been one of them. And then there's, the huge middle class, which is basically like you're just average person, and then there's like the really dirt poor people. And sometimes you fit in multiple categories. But anyways, the funny thing about those snobbish, real rich people is sometimes there'd be even more like snobby-ish, more snobby rich people. So like you'd have these like contests between the two different rich people, and it would just blows me away. But here's God himself, who doesn't have this prideful attitude, who's not talking down to people, who's not acting all put out, and who gives of himself for the betterment of us. And that's just amazing. So then the second thing that Jesus didn't do is he wasn't apathetic. Apathy is where you just don't care. Okay? So God didn't have the prideful attitude of, but he also didn't have the apathetic attitude of, I just don't care what happens to you. And this amazes me because God himself, remember, the only one worthy of honor and praise and all those things, is the only one who could die for us and the only one who did die for us. That very much so. Sometimes I think about it and it just kind of doesn't make sense if you just, think about it. If I was God, I probably wouldn't have created people if I knew that they were going to act like we act. Let's just circumnavigate this whole issue and boom, you're not created. Problem solved. And but that's not what we see God doing, and that just, I don't know, just something about it, just that he humbled himself when he was the only person who shouldn't have had to. Revelations puts it like this. He said, who is worthy to open the scroll? And they're looking everywhere. They're lifting up the blankets, they're looking under the bed. Nobody's worthy to open the scroll. And then they say, the Lamb who was slain is worthy. Jesus Christ is worthy. I mean, just the only one who was worthy. In heaven, on earth, this was the only one who was worthy. And this was the one who died for us. I think sometimes we miss the gravity of the situation. And that's really, really the heart of this. Because if you think about it, okay, so we're talking about acting like Jesus. One of the defining characteristics of Jesus was his humility. I mean, obviously, you can't boil Jesus down into a single word. But that was a major part of his character. Everything that Jesus did radiated from this character of his, who he is, this godness of him. And, we lack that character, in case you didn't know. We are not little gods. We never will be gods. Even when we die and are resurrected, we'll never be made into little gods. We won't inherit our own planets to populate with their own harem of virgins, and it is no, just no. We will never be gods. Just I hate to rip off that Band-Aid, but the quicker we address it, the quicker we can move on. So we don't have that character. We never will, but we can weigh our actions against His. What should we do? Well, what did He do? So let's look at Jesus' treatment of a stranger here. I'll pick up the story in verse 43, but it really begins a couple verses before, and it goes a couple verses past verse 48. You're free to read it. I'm not going to read it, though, right now. And a woman was there who had been subject to bleeding for 12 years, but no one could heal her. She came up behind him and touched the edge of his cloak, and immediately her bleeding stopped. "Who touched me?" Jesus asked. When they all denied it, Peter said, "Master, the people are crowding and pressing against you." In fact, if you read the verse before, it says that they almost crushed him. Another translation says they almost stomped him to death, or something like that. I forget exactly how it's worded, but the idea of extreme pressure. This was not a very comfortable situation. And pressing against you. But Jesus said, "Someone touched me. I know that power has gone out from me." Then the woman, seeing that she could not go unnoticed, darn it, I can't get away from this one, came trembling and fell at his feet in the presence of all the people. She told why she had touched him and how she had been instantly healed. Then Jesus said to her, "Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace." Okay, so there's a lot of stuff going on here, but before we get into it, I just want to ask a very simple question. Why did Jesus stop? He didn't stop to heal her because she was already healed. So why did he stop? She obviously didn't want the attention on her. Did you notice how she tried sneaking off into the background? Did you notice how when Jesus stops and says, "Hey, what just happened?" she doesn't come out? She tries to maybe he'll just kind of forget about it and move on, but he doesn't. So that kind of begs this question, why did Jesus stop? So in our thinking, we might think something along the lines of this. Well, maybe he stopped for the sake of his public image. Maybe he was trying to, play politics, help people to see his power so that they'd, come to know God. Because that's something that we would do, right? Yeah, I'm being prideful, but it's okay that I'm being prideful because good will come of it. Oh, right, you never act like that? Okay, all right. You're all perfect. Was it maybe to help him make disciples? Maybe he thought, hey, if I stop and address this, I might have more followers. I might get more Twitter likes. I guess it'd be Facebook likes and Twitter follows, whatever. Maybe it was so that people could listen to him, so you could have a preaching opportunity, but he doesn't. He just keeps on walking. So why did Jesus stop? And I want to recall you to what we just read in Philippians chapter 2, verses 5 through 8. Jesus didn't use his position to benefit himself. He didn't. It says that he humbled himself, well, we can go back and read Philippians again if you want. So if it wasn't to benefit himself, then it was to benefit everyone else. He didn't use his godness to exploit people. Remember that when you're watching a televangelist and they tell you about how if you support their money and their ministry and you donate this, they'll give you a special blessed cloth and whatever. And if you help fund their new jet, that 1,000 flowers will bloom on your grave or whatever. Remember this, because if somebody doesn't share the heart of the master, they probably aren't the pupil of the master. Remember that. There's going to be people who mess up, obviously, and nobody's perfect. But when somebody has an overriding theme, their whole character is just kind of one of, look at me. It's just a dangerous place to be in. And I guess that's really what I'm trying to say, dangerous place to be in. So let me just kind of set the stage here, and we'll keep the question in your mind of why did Jesus stop? So there's this very important guy who's given a name. I believe it was Jairus or something. And And he's a very important religious person. He has dealings in the temple and everything. This is a respected person. If Jesus wants to play politics, this is the one to do it with. And his daughter is, she's about to die. And so this very important man says, hey, Jesus, can you come and heal my daughter? And Jesus is like, okay, let's go. But before this happens, right before this happens, Jesus is dealing with this man who's demon-possessed. And so Jesus heals him, and then he says, go and tell everyone. Okay? So then Jairus comes and says, hey, my daughter, she's dying. Can you do something about this? Okay, yeah. So he goes and follows her. And then we have something very interesting happen. We have this unnamed woman. The guy's house that Jesus was going to, he got a name in the verse. Even though he appears just as much as this woman does, his name is specifically mentioned. He was a big deal. But this woman, her name isn't even mentioned. Look at this. Let's see, where is it? Verse 43. And a woman, just some woman who's bleeding, her, she, who touched me, someone touched me, just a person, some person. Then the woman, she. See, we don't have a name here. This isn't an important person. This is a nobody. And remember, Jesus is on his way to someone who is an important person. A very, very important person. And here's the real kicker. When Jesus heals this, he says to her, daughter, your faith has healed you, go in peace. He stopped what he was doing. He stopped his busy schedule just to tell her, your faith has healed you, go in peace. Well, she already knew that she was healed. See, what Jesus just did is he publicly validated her in front of everyone. Now, I'm not going to read it, but the story continues on that Jesus gets to this really important person's house, and the daughter's already dead. And he tells her, she's not, he tells them, she's not really dead, she's just sleeping. And they're like, this guy's an idiot. So he tells them, I'll get out of the house. Go on now. Go on now. So they get out of the house, and he heals her. And then he tells them this. He says, tell no one. Okay, so let's keep this in perspective. Demon-possessed man, unnamed, not given a name, go tell everyone. Some random unknown woman, doesn't have a name, publicly acknowledges her. Very important man who just raised your daughter from the dead. One of a very select few in the New Testament that Jesus raised from the dead. There's only a couple who he did that to. And he tells them, tell no one. I think if it was us, it would probably be different. You know? Maybe we would go say, hey, everybody, I just raised Jairus' daughter from the dead. Me, I did that. And then, but the woman that nobody knows her name, well, who cares? The street rat. I don't care, whatever. Yeah, if you saw it, hey, kudos, whatever. But I don't really need her kudos, because she's a nobody. Demon-possessed man that nobody misses, that everybody just wants gone out of their hair because he's a pain in the butt to deal with. I don't care if anybody knows about him. But Jairus' daughter, look what I've done. But Jesus does the exact opposite. And the reason for that is because, anybody want to guess? He wasn't playing politics. Jesus specifically told the very important person, don't tell anyone. Because he wasn't in it for politics. And you know what the amazing thing is? This really important person actually listens to Jesus and he says, okay, I won't tell anybody. There's another story where Jesus tells a person, don't tell anyone, and they go and tell everyone. It's interesting to think about. So this obviously wasn't about politics for Jesus. So now let's look at the woman herself. It says that she had an issue of bleeding for 12 years. That's a really long time. How she wasn't septic, I don't know. That sounds like a really big issue. I think iron deficiency is might be is something in her diagnosis. Yeah, maybe. Maybe she needs to start using skillets when she cooks. So here's the thing about Jewishness. Okay, if you had a loss of blood, you were unclean, which means you couldn't sacrifice to God. You couldn't even enter the temple. Well, now here's a little piece of info gristle for the Jewish community. If you did not go to the temple, you were not part of the community. Everything happened in the temple. They would teach kids their schooling in the temple. They would handle their legal cases in the temple. They would offer their sacrifices. Anyone? In the temple. Everything in Jewish community was revolved around the temple, a place that she hadn't been for 12 years. She couldn't go in because she was bleeding. Bleeding made her unclean. In fact, a woman during her period couldn't even enter the temple. She had to wait till she was done and then wait a couple days after. No, maybe it wasn't. I think it was after it stopped bleeding, you had to wait till the next day or something like that and then offer the sacrifice. I don't remember, because if a woman gave birth to a child, she would have to stay out of the temple for so many days. If it was a boy, it was a shorter amount of time, because the boy could be circumcised as a mark of the covenant. But if it was a girl, it had to be a longer amount of time because she couldn't be circumcised. There was no mark of the covenant, and then she would go on to have periods herself. So the time was increased for, that's a whole conversation about the law. I'm sorry for getting off topic. Anyways, my moral of the story being here that 12 years is a heck of a long time, and so she was completely kicked out of the community. This is kind of a big point for us. See, we can kind of start to maybe understand part of it if you remember the quarantine and how dark it was not being here in church, being isolated in your house, cooped up all day, breathing your own stink. I don't know why, but when the quarantine hit, everybody thought that they had to quarantine from the shower too. And then people started wearing masks, and they thought that they didn't have to brush their teeth anymore. Y'all, brush your teeth, right? Is that not funny yet? Everybody's looking down like, I don't brush my teeth anymore. So, okay, we have this woman who's not clean. She was a woman. Now, to us, it's like, okay, what does that matter? Well, in Jewish thought, women weren't exactly I don't know how else to put this. They weren't really like, the most important people. You know what I mean? Like, there was men, and then there was the firstborn son. He was like, obviously extremely important. And women weren't property. That's a common misconception that people think that women were property in Jewish thought. They were not. They were honored, yes, but not exactly. It's like a knick-knack. You keep it on your shelf. You don't really do anything with it. It kind of stays there. But it's a very cool knick-knack. It's a very pretty knick-knack. Do you see my shelf with my knick-knack? Kind of like that. Yeah, okay, why not? So okay, this isn't like a firstborn son. This isn't an important woman. She's not like she doesn't work at the temple or anything like that. She doesn't even have a name. I mentioned that. She is an unscheduled interruption in Jesus' life. An unscheduled interruption. I'm doing this thing. I've got this to-do list. You're not on the list. She's an unscheduled interruption. Now, if you've ever been something like a leader of any kind, not just pastor, any kind of a leader, you understand how irritating it can be to have unscheduled interruptions. She had no social or political profit to Jesus, and she was at the end of her rope, obviously, as you can tell by her act of desperation. Typically, people only resort to acts of desperation when they are desperate. You guessed it. So that brings the question again, why did he stop? Well, with all that information, we can see at least 3 reasons why he stopped. The first reason was to encourage her. Who knows? Maybe she ended up getting saved as one of the first-generation Christians. We don't know. We don't know that she didn't. It's an interesting thought. Either way, a little bit of encouragement can always do people good. I mean, there's just a lot of hurt people, and it never hurts to encourage people, unless you're encouraging them in sin. Don't encourage people to sin. That's bad, okay? So, okay, that's the first thing, to encourage. So the second one reason was to encourage faith. Notice how Jesus specifically mentions the faith. Daughter, your faith has healed you. So go in peace. Jesus oftentimes said these kinds of things to help encourage people to trust. Will the Son of Man find faith when he comes? See, he always said these little things just to kind of remind people and to point forward to what was happening. So to encourage her, to encourage faith. And the third obvious reason is to justify her to the Jewish community. He basically just restored her to a place of not being an outcast anymore. Now, once again, to us, it's like, why bother? But to her, this was life-changing. 12 years of being ostracized. See, we hide inside of our houses on Facebook because we don't want to deal with people, we don't want to forgive, we don't want to push ourselves out into productive living. But for her, it wasn't something that she was choosing, it was something that she was cast out. This is extremely important. And here's the thing I want you to grasp, and I'm going to kind of lead into it first, though. Making time for her was a small thing for Jesus, but for her it was life-changing. So here's the thing I really want to get to. Jesus wasn't about a to-do list. The interruptions were part of his journey. Okay, I'm going to say that again, just let it sink in for a little bit, okay? Jesus wasn't about a to-do list. The interruptions for him were part of the journey. Once you understand that about how Jesus acted, it changes everything about how we should act. We see things as inevitable stumbling blocks, dead ends, closed doors. What if we started thinking about it a little bit differently? What if we said, okay, maybe this isn't a closed door, maybe this is a change of direction. Yes, exactly, yes. Maybe the road has a curve on it that I didn't want, but that's where I'm going. I can give you another example. Paul, the same Paul who wrote Philippians, I mentioned him earlier, was, hey, let's go tell people about Jesus, so he's going this way. And the Holy Spirit tells him, no, don't go that way, go this way instead. To me, it's like this. Well, they need Jesus just as much as they do. What does it matter where I go? Just pick a place and go. But God obviously had his own reasons, and it led Paul straight to getting in a whole heap of trouble. I mean, you can read the story in Acts, but it did not go well. And so in our thinking, we would think, well, that obviously means that he misheard God because God would have opened the doors. Once again, a closed door isn't necessarily an interruption. Maybe that was part of Paul's journey. See the difference of thought there? If I'm seeing it like this, a closed door, a stumbling stone, an end of the road, I'm seeing finality. And what God wants me to see is, look where I'm leading you. You have to stop looking at things as an insurmountable obstacle, as a break from my schedule, of a break from my to-do list, and instead see it as God has something to do. This is not an interruption, it's part of the journey. But our problem is that we don't like to see it like that. We like to think more black and white. I have my life in control, I have my life planned out. That was not part of my plan. That's how we like to think. Do we take the time to encourage? Here's just some people. I'll give you two examples of how I think that this relates to us. The first example, do we take the time to encourage the regulars in our life? Now, you might say, what do you mean regulars? Okay, all right. The people who are always there that seem like they have it all together. You're going to have some people who are regulars in your family. They're going to be people who kind of hold the family together, but they're kind of in the background maybe. They're going to be people who maybe don't gossip and complain, but instead they just kind of say nice little things. They're going to be people who you can talk to. Okay, these regular people, they do their job well, they do it efficiently. At work, they're the ones who aren't causing a problem. They do the work that they're assigned, they do it well, they move on. In ministry, they're going to be the people who are always doing their ministry, they never call in sick. In let's see, what's another realm that this could be in? In the family unit, it's going to be the child that doesn't You know how usually like all your children will be terrible and they'll all cause mass destruction and destroy your life as much as possible. There'll always be that one who's like a little more passive than the other ones. And they kind of, maybe bring more unity and cohesion. Like, if you've got like a second-born, for instance, they're going to be the end of you. You're going to die from them. They're going to be the cause of, they're going to say, heart attack due to stress due to your second-born. That's just how it's going to be. But then there's going to be the other one that's like, oh, this is the one, this is the glue that holds us all together. Do you take time to encourage the regulars in your life? See, those are the people that we oftentimes overlook because they're faithful, so we assume that they're okay. Right? They're always there, so we assume that there always will be there. Doesn't that kind of just make sense? Okay. Another way that I think that this, a way that we can ask this, and so the second thing here is I'll introduce by a quote from C.S. Lewis. He said this, children are not distractions from more important work, they are the most important work. Which kind of leads us to, besides just thinking about that quote itself, let's ask a few questions that I think can help us direct that quote somewhere. You make time for who is most important, so who are you catering to? You can tell what you value in life by where your money goes to, and the same is true for your time. Where does your time go to? That will show you who you are catering to. You make time for who is most important. If people aren't making time for you, you probably won't carry on that friendship very long, will you? Kind of be something that maybe you think that they don't care about you, right? The exact same thing is true for maybe children. I keep hearing this same resounding theme about how to reach the next generation. They keep saying it over and over again. They said it about millennials. Now they're saying it about Gen Z. They said it about the one before millennials, whatever the crap that was. But they keep saying the same thing over and over again. And this is what they say. Fathers are extremely important. Establish a relationship with your kids. The same thing repeated over and over and over again. What is the most likely source for religion to be spread? Father to son. Without fail, father to son. The most common religious transmission is through father to son. How is that possible when women are the ones who do all the work? I don't know. I don't know. It's just how it is. So you make time for who is most important for you. Who are you catering to? I'll give you another example. When you come home tired and you've been giving it all to your boss, and then you come home and you can't muster any for your wife. Right? Okay, you guys got real silent. So, okay, you're giving your all to this. Why aren't you giving your all to this? What is more important to you? Because here's the thing. Women do this thing. It's very irritating. They struggle in private, and then all of a sudden, because men just kind of like habits. We like doing the same thing over and over again. So women wait until the breaking point, and then they'll say something like, I want a divorce, and the guys always respond the exact same. What? I thought we were all good. Because we're just clueless. We like going through the same things over and over again. It's just great. Men have this way of just having things in like real orderly. Take, for instance, marital relations. If it was up to men, there would be no thing called intimacy. What is this intimacy you speak of? It would be about 1 minute of me time, and that's how that would go. Food would always be ready at this time. The house would always be clean and in order. The kids would never misbehave in their minds. I'm not saying this would be the reality. I'm saying this would be the expectation. And I think that real fitting, especially for our time that we live in, is James 1:19-20. It's something that I think applies to almost every situation that we face. Everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry. Because a human anger does not produce the righteousness that God desires. Man, we could say that a different way because we live in a digital world. So I'm going to paraphrase what James said here, okay? Everyone should be quick to read the whole post, slow to post a rant, and slow to misunderstand what the other person posted. Preach it! Preach it, because I tell you what, this is about what we do. Oh, no, they didn't. Well, let me give my book-long reply. Chapter 1 of Why You're Wrong. Chapter 2, You're an Idiot. Chapter 3, entitled My Ruminations of Your Stupidity. I mean, this is really how we treat people online, and it's like, oh, well, it's different because it's not in person. Okay. So how do we act as parents and spouses? How do we act as employees and employers? How do we act as friends? How do we handle politics, stressful situations? How do we act when our plans get upset? How do we apply these to all those things that I just said? Parenting, spousing, if you want to call it that, working, ministry, friends, politics, stress. I was watching this funny show called The IT Crowd, and he says, we're going to have a stress seminar because it's the fastest killer of people. Every day, 5 million or some like totally off the top number die because of stress. There goes another one. There goes another one. And then he says, at the end of the day, whoever is still stressed will be fired. And everybody goes, oh. I'm sorry. I guess it's just British humor, I guess. And here's the thing. Don't judge yourself by how you act when everything is fine. Judge yourself by how you react when it's not. Don't do that. Some people say, I don't do that anymore, and what they mean is, I haven't had an opportunity in a while. Not everybody who says that means that. And if you say that, I'm not attacking anybody. I'm just saying, I've heard some people say this, I don't deal with that anymore, and what they mean is, I haven't had an opportunity to deal with that in a while. Because that is a difference. Oh, I'm actually good with kids. Oh, how many kids do you have in the house? None. Well, I wonder how you got so good with kids. You know, I'm actually don't get mad at my boss. Well, do you have a job? No. Well, wow, didn't see that one coming. Hey, me and my spouse are doing great. She's been dead for 7 years. Like, I mean, if you're not in the situation anymore, you can't say you did it any better. And here's a very important thing that we'll probably get back to in the future. Don't compare yourself to who you used to be, but who you should be. Don't compare yourself to who you used to be. Compare yourself to who you should be. We hate, as people, inconveniences. We hate interruptions. We hate listening. We hate changing our minds. Absolutely hate changing our minds. When somebody says that we might be wrong, we really take it personally. I've already made up my mind of what to believe. Don't confuse me with the facts. We hate closing our mouths even more. Man, if I just have a zinger, I need to say it. I need to throw it out there. And we hate withholding our anger. So all this adds up to, we have a hard time acting like Jesus. And that's the bottom line. We don't have that whole humility thing down. So as we go to the closing here and the conclusion, let's look at Colossians 3, verses 12 to 13. Therefore, as God's chosen people, holy and dearly loved, clothe yourself with compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness. Well, I got to tell them how it is. People don't love the truth anymore. I got to set them straight and tell them about God. Kindness, humility, gentleness. But I think it would be better if I yelled at them. I think it'd be better if I told them how stupid and sinful they were. I think it'd be better if I told them they were going to hell. I think it would be better if I went through the Walmart parking lot preaching because I'm not ashamed of the gospel. Yeah, but maybe Jesus is a little bit of ashamed of how you're acting right now. That's a bigger question. Humility, gentleness, and patience, bear with each other and forgive one another if any of you has a grievance against someone. And so the zinger of this verse, forgive as the Lord forgave you. And I think that that's a good way to kind of finalize this whole discussion here about acting like Jesus, okay? So, as a Christian, I want you to really think about this. It's not good enough to call yourself a Christian but drive as though you own the road. Did you know that when you're on the road, you don't own it? That means that if it's a yield, you yield. You know what a yield is? It's not a stop. That's a stop. A yield is where you yield with the traffic, okay? A stop sign, I know it's similar because they're both red, but a yield is typically a triangle, and a stop is that confusing one with all those sides. Man, I can't even count them. Is that 7, 8 signs? Yes, that's sarcasm. You have to live in Texas to understand that. Texans have no idea about the concept of a yield. They think that yield is literally stop. So they reach a complete dead stop, and then they do this thing. It's like, get out of the way. And the other day, this happened. You know the relief route going into Alamo? You know that's a yield. Okay, you knew that? Okay. So this Texan gets into the yield, and they pull the full stop, and the diesel behind him was not having it. So he just gets all up on him, honks, and he's like, and so the Texan, man, he got out of there. He cleared on out. There was nobody coming, and it was a yield anyways. Like, geez, guy, what are you doing? So anyways, nobody died in the making of that joke, but I still enjoyed it. You know, if you're a Christian, it's not good enough to call yourself a Christian to have your little bumper stickers and then cut people off. You know how many people will swerve at a bike on the road? You'd be surprised. Bikes don't belong on the road. Actually, they do. Welcome to the United States of America. You should read the laws instead of chasing people off the road. Just throwing that out there. Another thing, it's not good enough to treat your family as an afterthought. That's not good enough. If you're a Christian, your family shouldn't be an afterthought. Where you're seeing a lot is you're seeing a lot of ostracism with the older people. We don't need the older people. We've got Google. Get them out of our lives. They're just a hindrance. They can't change with the times. This isn't a good thing. You need the elderly people in your life. Elderly people, I would say, are some of the most important people you can have in your life. They've been through a lot of different things, and they just kind of know how to. It's okay. Take a step back. Like all these young people who don't have old people in their life, they're looking at all the different things going on in the world. It's the end of the world. Meanwhile, the older people are all like, okay, well, let me tell you what happened in my life. There's this little thing called World War II. So if they're old enough, which they're probably not anymore because most of them have died out, they might remember things like that real big flu, around the Great Depression. Yeah, now most of the people who lived through that are dead, but there's still some of them out there. Some very life-changing issues. A couple years ago, it wasn't uncommon for people to have lived through both of the Great Wars. And getting through that, they're on the other side, and they're able to say, look, hold on. Things have seemed completely hopeless before, but just take a step back. Another one of the important parts of having elderly people in your life. There's this idea that we don't need elderly people because we've got Google, and it's just wrong. It's just wrong. Did you know that it's Google's 22nd birthday today? Yeah. It's not good enough to call yourself a Christian, but decide your own scale of morals without searching the Bible, God's very word, and we're not even consulting it. It's not good enough to let people know who's in charge, yet you fail to die for them. God established authority. You have to be okay with that. You have to submit to your authority. You don't have to like it, you have to do it. That's the way it is. However, as a leader, if people don't know that you would die for them, but you make sure that they're under your thumb. Yeah, have you ever seen the Goofy movie? Chuck referenced it a couple months back. Under your thumb, Goof. He's telling Goof how to raise his son, and he tells him you just got to basically squash all of his hopes and dreams, I guess. Would everyone who has encountered you have a clear picture of who Jesus was? I know that's an unfair standard, but it is very humbling. If the only way somebody ever knew about Jesus was through you, that's a very humbling thought. And it's also very revealing. We want to say, oh, I'm good enough. And what if I said, you are the only image of Jesus they will ever know. They'll never read the Bible. They'll only know from what they know from you. That's very revealing. Well, all of a sudden it's like, well, maybe there's a few things that I could change. Because I don't think that Jesus had a real smart reply for everything. I really don't feel like he was the one who made people feel stupid all the time. So that brings us to a last question here. What are you really living for in life? And that really is the defining trait of how we act and what it's like to really be a Christian. Who are you really living for? Lord, we pray that you'd help us. Oh, Lord, that you'd help us.